What if the child you abandoned grew up to be a star so luminous, so unmistakably yours that the entire world recognized her before you did? Claire Whitman never planned to be a mother that day. Not truly. Not to that child. The one born with skin too dark eyes, too deep truth too loud. In a cold hospital room under fluorescent lights that showed no mercy, Claire turned away from the one person who might have saved her soul. She didn't hold the baby. She didn't whisper her name. She just signed the paper and erased herself from the story. But stories have a way of rewriting themselves. 18 years later, Claire stood frozen in a grocery aisle, staring at a magazine cover. The young woman on the page had her cheekbones, her mouth, her gaze, but the world called her Naomi Brooks, not daughter. That moment unraveled every lie Claire had clung to, because the past doesn't forget no matter how hard you try to bury it. And some children, no matter how abandoned, find their way back, not to forgive, but to ask the one question that splits the silence wide open. Why didn't you want me? This is not a story of easy redemption. It is a reckoning. And it begins right here. Claire Whitman never expected it to happen like this. Not with this kind of silence. Not under this kind of light. 15 hours of labor, 4 IV bags, 2 failed epidurals. She was soaked in sweat, trembling, exhausted beyond pain. Her fingers clutched the rail of the delivery bed, white-knuckled and shaking. When the baby's first cry pierced the sterile quiet of the room, Claire's breath caught in her throat. The sound was too sharp, too alive, and yet in the space between heartbeats, everything fell still. No one cheered. No one clapped. The sky did not open. Instead, the silence thickened, unnatural, heavy like judgment. The nurse wrapped the infant in a cream-colored blanket, walked toward Claire with careful hesitation, and gently turned the fabric down to reveal the newborn's face. Claire blinked, then froze. The baby's skin was not pale nor peach-toned like hers. It was a deep, warm bronze, undeniably, unmistakably the child of Marcus Ellis, the man Claire had once loved in secret and never spoken of again. The baby opened her eyes briefly. Dark, quiet, ancient almost, as if even she understood that her very existence threatened to split open everything around her. Greg didn't speak. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He simply stood near the door, arms folded across his chest, watching the scene unfold like a man forced to witness a betrayal he had long suspected, but prayed would never be real. His voice, when it came, was colder than the floor beneath Claire's bare feet. You leave this hospital with that baby, and you leave alone. There was no second chance embedded in that sentence. No room for compromise. Only a line carved clean through the years they had shared the home they had built, the plans they once made. Claire turned her face away. She didn't ask how much the baby weighed, didn't ask if she was healthy, didn't ask for a name. She didn't ask anything at all. She simply lay there, still bleeding, still open, and let herself become something hollow. The child she had just birthed was a living confession, a child that proved what Claire had tried so hard to bury, that love, when born out of fear and shame, is easily discarded. That color still mattered. That fear still ruled. The nurse, her voice barely a whisper, asked, "Would you like to hold her?" Claire couldn't look, couldn't breathe, couldn't allow even the smallest contact that might break the dam holding everything in. "No," she whispered. "I can't. Please, just take her." The answer wasn't just a rejection of a child. It was a rejection of motherhood, of honesty, of herself. It was the final nail in the box Claire was about to seal and bury deep beneath years of silence. She hadn't even chosen a name, hadn't whispered a blessing, hadn't said goodbye. The baby was wheeled away, small and swaddled, and Claire never saw her again. Or so she thought. Because some stories don't end at goodbye. They just begin. Greg Whitman didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw a chair, slam a door, or make a scene. His silence was louder than any scream. He stood just outside the hospital room, one shoulder against the wall, arms crossed tightly, eyes fixed on a spot somewhere far beyond the present. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from calm, but from a man who has already made up his mind. Claire saw it the second their eyes met. There would be no forgiveness, no conversation, just one line delivered like a verdict. If you take that baby home, don't come home. He didn't need to explain the betrayal. The baby girl sleeping in the nurse's arms told the story for him. Her skin, Marcus's skin, was enough. Claire wanted to scream, to fall to the floor, to rewind time and undo everything that led to this moment. But all she did was nod, a slow, aching, shameful nod. She knew what he meant, and she knew he meant every word. The nurse stood patiently by her bedside, still holding the baby. The newborn's tiny hands twitched under the blanket. Her mouth formed soft, absent, sucking motions. She was alive, so heartbreakingly alive. And Claire was dying inside. She turned her face to the wall, away from her husband, away from the child, away from everything she wasn't brave enough to hold on to. The nurse tried once more. "Would you like to hold her?" Even just for a moment, Claire didn't answer. She couldn't. Her chest felt carved out. Her body still ached from labor, but the real pain was deeper, quieter, more permanent. She simply shook her head, a small movement, barely visible, barely. Then she whispered, "No, just please take her away." She wasn't just saying no to a baby. She was saying no to being a mother, no to the future, no to herself. The choice wasn't about logic or legality, it was about survival. Greg had given her an ultimatum, and Claire in her exhaustion and shame believed she didn't have a choice at all. They handed her a clipboard. 3 pages. The first to relinquish parental rights. The second to forfeit naming privileges. The third to waive future contact with the adoptive family. She stared at the lines without really seeing them, and then she picked up the pen. Claire Whitman. Claire Whitman. Claire Whitman. Each signature was a scar, a quiet, irreversible retreat from a love she hadn't allowed to blossom. She imagined the ink sinking into the paper like blood into cotton, something that would never wash out, even if no one ever saw it again. When the nurse turned to leave the room with the baby, Claire didn't look, but she felt it. But the absence, the loss, the hollow where her daughter had been just moments before. The hallway door swung shut behind them, and the soft hiss of the hydraulic hinge felt like the world exhaling after a cruel decision had been made. She bit down on her lips so hard she tasted metal. Anything to keep from crying. Anything to stop herself from running after the nurse and screaming, "Wait, I changed my mind." But she didn't. She lay in that bed, bleeding, broken, empty. And still. Claire thought it was over. That this was the end. That silence would protect her. But the past doesn't stay buried. It waits, and sometimes it grows teeth. Claire Whitman moved on, or at least that's what it looked like from the outside. Within a year of that hospital room, she gave birth again, this time to twins, Rachel and Luke. They had Greg's smile and Claire's eyes. They were healthy, joyful, and more than anything, they were visible. To the world, Claire was a doting mother of 2. The kind who showed up early for school pickups, who volunteered at fundraisers, who packed organic lunches with heart-shaped notes inside. Her neighbors called her radiant. Her friends said she had it all together. And Greg, he never brought up what came before. It was as if their first child had evaporated into a sealed folder somewhere in a legal archive, forgotten by everyone except Claire, because Claire never really forgot. It lived in the quiet moments, in the gaps between seconds. When she changed diapers in the dark, she sometimes imagined an extra one sitting beside her. When she buckled Rachel and Luke into the car seats, she'd pause just briefly, as if another small figure was meant to be there. And late at night, when the house had settled and the wine had worn off, the memory returned with full weight and no mercy. She had dreams, unforgiving, vivid dreams. Sometimes the baby was crying in a hospital bassinet, reaching out for a mother who never came. Other nights, the child had grown into a teenager, walking past Claire on the street without knowing her. The worst dream, the one that came more often than any other, was silence. A dream where Claire stood alone in an empty nursery, hearing nothing at all. No coos, no cries, just the echo of the child she refused to hold. Greg never asked. never offered comfort. He believed in erasure wipe the slate clean, raise the children you chose, forget the one you didn't. Claire let him believe she had done just that. But grief doesn't need permission to survive. It grows in the silence. It festers. Rachel and Luke grew quickly, and Claire poured herself into motherhood like it was penance. Every birthday cake was homemade. Every school project perfectly color-coded. She was there at every soccer game, every ballet recital, every pediatrician's visit. She loved them completely, fiercely, but underneath every gesture was a whisper, "I will not fail you the way I failed her." And still she never spoke of Naomi. Not once, not even to herself by name. The girl had become a shadow, a space, a locked room in the mansion of Claire's memory that she never entered but always felt behind the door. Sometimes when Rachel asked if they had any other siblings, Claire would smile too tightly and say, "No, sweetheart. It's always been just the two of you." That was the lie she lived in. A house built on denial, painted over with Pinterest-perfect walls and spotless holiday cards. But behind closed doors, Claire was haunted. Not by what she lost, but by what she gave away. And the thing about secrets, especially the kind that live in blood, is that they don't stay buried forever. They don't die. They wait, quietly, patiently, until the day they come knocking, not asking for forgiveness, but demanding to be seen. On paper, Claire Whitman had rebuilt everything. A beautiful house in suburban Maryland, a husband with a stable job in commercial real estate, 2 bright, well-mannered children, summer camps, family portraits, a chocolate Labrador named Max. From the outside, the Whitmans were the kind of family you see on a Christmas card, the kind you imagine sipping cider in matching pajamas. But what no one saw was the space that followed Claire like a ghost. The unspoken third child. The breath she sometimes held for no reason. The face she remembered but had never fully memorized. As Rachel and Luke grew, Claire learned to perfect the performance. She sat through PTA meetings with a smile, hosted birthday parties with Pinterest-worthy themes, and offered parenting advice to other mothers as if her motherhood began the day her twins were born. The past was not discussed, not even with Greg. Especially not with Greg. Because Greg had made the cost of that silence very clear. To him, what had happened in that hospital room was a closed chapter. The mistake had been erased. He never mentioned Marcus. Never asked about the baby. Never once used the word daughter. In his eyes, Claire had chosen the family. The correct family. And any sign of lingering regret would have been seen as betrayal. So she said nothing. Not when Rachel asked where babies came from. Not when Luke brought home a school assignment about family trees. Claire simply edited herself out of the version of the story that mattered. She taught herself how to look forward only. And yet, certain moments cracked her open without warning. One afternoon, she took the twins to the mall for back-to-school shopping. As they passed the food court, Claire spotted a little girl with dark, curly hair, maybe 7 or 8, eating frozen yogurt with an older woman. The girl looked up, caught Claire's gaze, and smiled. For one heartbeat too long, Claire stood frozen, her shopping bags hanging at her side. Her heart was pounding, her skin flushed. Something primal gripped her. She blinked, shook her head, and pulled herself away. It wasn't her. Of course it wasn't. Naomi would be a teenager by now. But that didn't stop Claire from imagining it, wanting it, needing it. She told herself this was what regret felt like, small waves, manageable. But deep down, she knew she was lying. It wasn't regret. It was absence. It was a kind of mourning that had no funeral, no name. Sometimes late at night, when the house had gone still, Claire would stand in the doorway of the twins' bedroom, watch them sleep, listen to the soft breath of children she had kept. Then, just as quietly, she'd return to her own room and stare into the dark, wondering, is she safe? Is she loved? Does she hate me? But even in those moments, Claire never spoke her name aloud. Naomi. The name she had whispered once in her mind before signing it away forever. It clung to her ribs like a bruise she couldn't touch. Greg would roll over beside her, already half asleep. "You okay?" he'd mumble. She'd always answer the same way. "Just tired." But what she meant was, "I'm unraveling." Because the truth Claire never said out loud was this: she had tried to build a perfect life over a broken foundation. And no matter how carefully she arranged the picture frames, no matter how pristine the white carpets remained, she could still feel the crack running beneath her feet, waiting, growing. And somewhere out there, the daughter she abandoned had not disappeared. She had simply begun. It started with something small. That's what always haunted Claire afterward. It wasn't a dramatic event. It wasn't fate pounding on her door. It was just a trip to the grocery store on a rainy Thursday afternoon. She was picking up eggs. That was it, eggs. Rachel had a bake sale the next day, and Claire, ever the responsible mom, ran out in the middle of a storm to get supplies. Hair pulled back. No makeup. Yoga pants. Just another chore. Just another ordinary moment. Until she saw it. There by the checkout stand was a stack of fashion magazines. And there, dead center on the cover of one of them, was a face that turned Claire's world inside out. She dropped the eggs. The carton burst on the tile with a soft, wet thud, yolk spreading like a slow explosion. But she didn't look down. Couldn't. Her eyes were locked on the girl in the photo. 17, poised, stunning, radiant skin the color of polished bronze, high cheekbones, a gaze that held something fierce and self-possessed. She was wearing a crimson velvet gown, chin lifted, mouth calm, and assured as though daring the world to question her place in it. The name printed in bold white letters beneath the image, Naomi Ellis. The new face of power. Claire stopped breathing. Her hands went cold. A flush of nausea rolled through her stomach like a wave of poison. Her knees nearly buckled. Because she knew. Instantly. Unmistakably. Without one shred of doubt. That was her daughter. The one she had never held. The one she had signed away 17 years ago. The one she had buried in silence and convinced herself would forget her. The one she had told herself she was protecting. Naomi had not disappeared into some unknown life. Naomi had risen. Claire grabbed the magazine off the rack with trembling fingers, holding it like it might vanish if she blinked. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She flipped the pages, devouring the article like a starving woman. Naomi Ellis, 17, a breakout star in the fashion world. Bold, brilliant, adopted, raised by a single mother in Chicago, planning to attend Columbia next year on a full scholarship, outspoken about race identity and visibility in media. Claire's vision blurred. She found herself in her car minutes later, unable to recall how she got there. The magazine was still clutched in her hands. The words swirled in her mind: Naomi, Naomi, Naomi. Her name wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a scream. She went home, barely speaking to Rachel and Luke, barely acknowledging Greg's casual greeting. She told them she had a headache, locked herself in the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and stared at the magazine until her eyes hurt. How many nights had she laid awake wondering where Naomi was, who she had become, whether she had survived? And now, out of nowhere, the answer had appeared in a checkout line, and it terrified her. Because now the question wasn't whether Naomi would come back. It was when. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat up in the dark, the magazine open beside her, flipping the pages again and again, like they held a secret message only she could read. She touched the image of Naomi's face, her face, and whispered, "I see you." But what she didn't say, what she couldn't even admit to herself yet, was the question rising like smoke in her chest. "Will you ever want to see me?" Claire had always believed that time dulled pain, that if you ignored something long enough, buried it deep enough, it would eventually quiet down and fade into the background noise of life. But seeing Naomi's face on that magazine shattered that illusion. There was no dulling. There was no forgetting. There was only delay. And now the past wasn't just knocking, it had kicked the door in. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on anything beyond that photo. Naomi's face haunted her from every corner of the house. Claire began seeing her in mirrors, in reflections on dark windows, in her daughter Rachel's smile, which suddenly painfully didn't seem to be quite hers anymore. She thought about calling someone, a therapist, a friend, but what could she say? "Hi, remember that child I never told you about? She's famous now." Claire had spent the better part of 2 decades constructing a perfect narrative, and now that narrative was collapsing like a paper house in a storm. At night, when Greg was asleep beside her, she would stare at the ceiling and whisper Naomi's name over and over, testing it, weighing it on her tongue like a foreign word she'd once known how to pronounce but had forgotten. The magazine stayed on her nightstand. She couldn't throw it away, couldn't tuck it in a drawer. It sat there like a quiet indictment, its glossy cover curling slightly at the corners, refusing to be ignored. She read the article until she memorized it. Every quote, every photo caption, every tiny piece of information that told her who Naomi had become. And it wasn't just the beauty that stunned her. It was the strength, the poise, the fire in Naomi's eyes, the way she spoke about her identity with no apology. Claire began searching online. She watched every interview, every campaign video, every runway clip. Naomi Ellis was not just known, she was adored, a voice, a force. She spoke on panels about transracial adoption and black visibility. She wasn't angry, at least not publicly, but she was aware. She carried herself like someone who knew where she came from, even if the full story had been kept from her. That knowledge both devastated and relieved Claire, because Naomi had clearly been loved, raised with care, supported. She had not been abandoned into chaos, but it also meant that Naomi didn't need her, and that was its own kind of grief. For the first time, Claire considered reaching out. She didn't know what she would say, or how, or even if Naomi would read the message, but the thought became a whisper that grew louder with each day. What if Naomi had questions too? What if she wanted answers? But then another voice spoke just as clearly, more brutal, more honest. What if she doesn't? What if she hates you? Claire was no longer sure which outcome she feared more. One evening, while Rachel was finishing homework and Luke was gaming upstairs, Claire opened her laptop and typed Naomi's name into a blank email. The address wasn't hard to find. There was a public contact listed for professional inquiries. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Her throat tightened. She typed 3 words, "I am sorry." Then she deleted them. She closed the laptop without sending anything. She wasn't ready, and maybe Naomi wasn't either, but that didn't stop the ache from growing. Didn't stop the questions. Didn't stop the unrelenting truth she had given Naomi up to save her life. But she wasn't sure anymore whose life she had ruined in the process. Naomi Ellis had never known the full story of where she came from, and for most of her life she told herself that was okay. She had a mother, her real mother, the one who raised her, named Denise. Denise was strong, no-nonsense, and deeply loving. A black woman from the south side of Chicago who worked 2 jobs, read bedtime stories with cracked hands, and never once made Naomi feel like she was anything less than a miracle. But even miracles have shadows, and Naomi's shadow was silence. She knew she had been adopted. Denise had told her early, calmly, clearly, with no lies. "You didn't come from my body, but you came from my heart," she would say, brushing Naomi's curls back from her face. Naomi believed that. She never doubted the love. But love doesn't erase questions. Why was she given up? Who made that decision? What did they look like? Did they ever wonder about her? These questions didn't burn every day. They simmered low, quiet like a pot left on the stove that you forget until it boils over. And in Naomi's case, it boiled over the older she got. As she became more visible, more successful, more publicly celebrated, she began to notice the absence more acutely. At interviews, stylists would ask, "Where's your family from?" And Naomi would pause, smile, offer something vague, because she didn't know, because someone had chosen not to tell her. Denise had always respected her boundaries. She kept the adoption file locked away in a drawer unless Naomi asked for it. And one day, right after Naomi's face first appeared in Teen Vogue, she finally did. It was a slim folder, pale blue, paper-clipped, Inside was a short stack of forms, most of them cold and bureaucratic. But one page stopped her cold. The signature. Claire Whitman. 3 times. The same name written in 3 different ways. All legal, all final. Naomi stared at it for a long time. Not with hatred, not even with sadness. Just with stillness. Because this was the name of the woman who let her go. And then she saw something else at the bottom of the form near the typed details of the birth, a scribbled note, biracial, father not present, mother in stable marriage. It was like being punched in the chest. She'd been erased not just by silence, but by shame. Someone had chosen to describe her life not as a beginning, but as a complication, a problem to solve, a threat to a marriage. Naomi didn't cry. She didn't rage. But a wall went up that day, something that had been open, naive, even closed. She didn't know what Claire looked like. She didn't Google her. Not yet. It felt too dangerous, too big. Instead, she folded the form again, placed it back in the folder, and asked Denise the only question that mattered. Did she ever try to find me? Denise, who never lied, looked her in the eye and said softly, "No, baby, not once." That was enough. Enough to answer one question, and enough to leave 10 more burning in its place. Naomi didn't know what she would do with the information. She didn't know if she ever wanted to meet this woman. But she knew one thing. If Claire Whitman was out there, she'd have to look her in the eye one day. And when that day came, Naomi wouldn't be a scared little girl. She'd be the woman Claire gave up and the one she could no longer ignore. The next morning, Naomi woke up with a different kind of stillness inside her. Not numbness, not rage, just clarity. That folder, those signatures, had cracked open something she had kept buried for years. She stared at the ceiling of her small but cozy apartment in Brooklyn, the morning light slicing across her white sheets, and whispered the name Claire Whitman. It no longer sounded mythical. It no longer made her feel like a forgotten child. It was just a name that had once belonged to the woman who left, and maybe the woman who now wanted to forget. Naomi slid out of bed, wrapped herself in her old college hoodie, and opened her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment. Google had never scared her before she'd used it to find photographers' contracts, even a birth control clinic once. But this felt different. This wasn't research. It was resurrection. She typed, Claire Whitman, Maryland. The results loaded slowly, or maybe it just felt that way. There were several hits. One was a real estate profile, Greg Whitman, Claire's husband, with a smiling headshot and a bio that made her stomach twist. Another was a local news feature from 6 years ago about the Whitman twins and their award-winning science fair project. Claire stood in the back of the photo hands, resting on the shoulders of a blonde teenage girl and boy. She looked ordinary, pretty, polished, not cruel, just painfully normal. Naomi stared at the photo for a long time. So this was the woman who had written her out of the story, and these were the children who got to stay. She didn't feel hatred. Not yet. Just distance. A vast emotional chasm that no amount of answers could immediately bridge. But she did feel curiosity, and more than that, control. For the first time in her life, Naomi had a direction, a name, a face, and a choice. She called Denise that afternoon, told her everything, the file, the research, the photo. Denise listened in silence. And when Naomi asked, "Do you think I should try to contact her?" Denise didn't answer right away. Then finally, "Baby, I think that's your right. But don't do it for her. Do it for you." Naomi nodded even though they were on the phone. "I'm not trying to get anything from her. I just want to know if she can even look me in the eye." That night, Naomi wrote a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A physical letter handwritten on linen paper the way her mother taught her to write thank you notes when she was little. But this wasn't a thank you. It was simple, direct, human. "My name is Naomi Ellis. I believe you may be my biological mother. I'm not writing for drama or closure. I'm writing because I exist. And I think you should know that. She didn't add her phone number, didn't ask for a reply, just signed it with her name and included a P.O. box. She dropped it in a mailbox on the corner of Flatbush Avenue and walked away. The air felt different, because whatever came next, awkward silence, trembling reunion, or a second rejection, Naomi had spoken. And this time, she wasn't the one being erased. It arrived on a Thursday. A plain envelope, no return address, just her name. Claire Whitman, written in handwriting that was careful, almost formal, like someone who had taken their time, who had rewritten it more than once. She almost didn't open it. She thought it was a thank you card from the PTA or another local campaign looking for support. It wasn't. She stood in the kitchen, holding the letter in her trembling hands while the dishwasher hummed behind her, the ordinary rhythm of domestic life carrying on like nothing had changed. But something had. Something was breaking open. From the moment she read that first line, "My name is Naomi Ellis," her stomach dropped, her throat dried, and her vision blurred with heat that wasn't quite tears yet, but hovered dangerously close. Naomi. She hadn't heard the name spoken aloud in 17 years, but she had whispered it in her mind nearly every night since, and now it was staring at her in black ink. Claire sat down at the edge of the kitchen stool, knees, weak breath shallow. She read the letter once, then again, and again. Each time the words settled deeper into her chest, lighting up every nerve she had tried to numb for nearly 2 decades. I'm not writing for drama or closure. I'm writing because I exist, and I think you should know that. That single sentence undid her. She covered her mouth with both hands as if she could somehow hold in the ache swelling inside her. She had always feared this moment, not because Naomi didn't deserve answers, but because Claire didn't believe she had any worth offering. What could she say? That she was scared, that her husband had given her an ultimatum, that she had convinced herself it was merciful to disappear, that she had built a life so carefully around the erasure of her own daughter, that now facing the truth, she no longer knew who she was, outside the lie. She stared at the letter until the afternoon light shifted on the floor tiles. At some point, Rachel came downstairs asking if they had almond milk. Claire nodded without speaking. She didn't trust her voice. She tucked the letter into a cookbook, an instinctive gesture like a child hiding something they weren't supposed to touch, and watched her daughter walk away, hair-bouncing sunlight catching on her cheekbone. Claire wondered for the first time in a long time what Naomi looked like now. Was her smile wide and open like Rachel's? Did she frown when she focused like Greg? Or had Claire's own nervous eyes passed through the bloodline like an unwanted heirloom? The questions came like a storm after drought. Had Naomi been safe? Had she felt loved? Had she ever called someone else mom without hesitation? And worst of all, did she hate her? Claire wasn't sure she could survive the answer, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. The letter, calm, precise, gracious, was not an invitation for pity or forgiveness. It was a declaration, a fact. Naomi existed. She had grown. She had risen. And now, with the weight of 17 years behind her, she had spoken into the silence Claire had tried so hard to preserve. Claire folded the letter gently, almost reverently, and placed it back in the envelope. She pressed her fingers against it like a prayer, and for the first time in years, she whispered Naomi's name out loud. It didn't echo. It landed. And that she realized was how reckoning begins, not with thunder, but with the return of a voice you once silenced and can no longer ignore. In the days that followed Naomi's letter, Claire found herself moving through her life like a ghost of the woman she used to be. Her body was present at the breakfast table, in the carpool line, in the conference room, at the real estate office, but her mind kept drifting back to those 3 handwritten lines. She carried the envelope with her, like a splinter lodged just beneath the skin, not visible, but constantly felt. It rested at the bottom of her handbag, nestled between her wallet and a pack of breath mints, as though part of her believed it might vanish if she stopped holding on to it. She didn't respond. Not right away. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know how to speak without collapsing under the weight of all she had never said. Words felt useless, too clean for the kind of mess she had made. She thought about calling her sister, or maybe even a therapist, but what could she possibly say that wouldn't sound hollow? My daughter wrote to me, the one I gave away, and she knows. Instead, she kept moving through the motions, slicing apples for Luke's lunch, folding Rachel's sweatshirt, watering the hydrangeas outside the kitchen window, and inside the silence grew louder. Guilt wasn't new. It had lived inside her for years, tucked into the quiet spaces of her home, in the pauses between holidays, in the moments when the twins laughed too hard and she smiled too easily. But now that guilt had a name, a face, a voice. At night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, tracing the years in her mind like a crime scene. Where had the damage begun, and what might have happened if she had made a different choice? Would Naomi have grown up resenting her anyway? Or was she resenting her now because she had never even tried? Claire didn't know what was worse, the thought that Naomi might hate her, or that she might feel nothing at all. And then came the dreams. In them Naomi was younger, 7, maybe 8, and standing in the middle of Claire's sunlit kitchen barefoot, asking simple questions with impossible weight. Why didn't you want me? Did I do something wrong? Why did they get to stay and I had to go? Claire always tried to answer, but the words never formed. Her throat tightened. Her mouth moved, but no sound escaped. Naomi just stood there watching, then turned and disappeared. Claire would wake up with her pillow damp and her heart racing. One morning, after another restless night, she stood at the bathroom sink, gripping the edge of the porcelain as if it could keep her grounded. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her face was thinner, her eyes tired, but there was something else, a flicker of the woman she used to be before the silence took hold. The woman who once believed that honesty, no matter how painful, was always better than regret. That morning, Claire made herself sit down. No distractions, no excuses. She pulled out a sheet of stationery from the back of the drawer, smoothed it out with slow, deliberate fingers, and uncapped a pen. She didn't know exactly what she was going to write, just that it needed to start somewhere. "My name is Claire Whitman," she began, "and I've been afraid of this moment for 17 years. But not anymore." She paused, breathed deeply, and kept writing. Naomi had almost forgotten about the letter. Not really forgotten, but forced it out of her mind the way you force out a wound that refuses to heal properly. She had mailed it 3 weeks ago, maybe 4, and each day that passed without a response gave her another excuse to let go. She told herself she didn't expect an answer, that the act of writing it had been enough, that she had claimed her place in the narrative whether Claire chose to engage or not. But deep down, buried beneath all that practiced indifference, she had hoped. So when the small cream-colored envelope arrived at her P.O. box, she just stared at it for a full minute. No logo, no address label, only her name written in delicate, familiar script. It was the handwriting of someone who had tried very hard to stay calm. That alone made her heart stutter. She turned the envelope over in her hands like it might disappear. Then slowly, carefully, she opened it. Inside was a single page of thick paper folded once. No card, no photographs, no dramatic pleas. Just the first few lines in ink so soft it looked almost uncertain. "My name is Claire Whitman. I received your letter, and I've been afraid of this moment for 17 years. Naomi stopped breathing. Her eyes scanned the lines again, more slowly this time. Claire's words weren't polished. They weren't defensive. They weren't trying to rewrite history. They were raw, vulnerable, almost clumsy in the way that honesty often is when spoken out loud for the first time. I don't know where to begin. I've imagined this moment so many times, and in every version I get it wrong. I say too much or not enough. I justify, I rationalize. But none of that matters now. You wrote to me not for closure, not for forgiveness, but because you exist. And I want you to know that you are not forgotten." Naomi felt her throat tighten. She sat down on the bench outside the post office, hands trembling as she held the letter, sunlight warming the edge of the page. For a moment the city around her faded, the passing cars, the flutter of pigeon wings, the dull murmur of strangers' conversations. All that remained were the words she had dreamed of, hated, longed for. I don't expect anything from you. Not grace, not contact. I don't even know if this letter will reach you. But if you are reading this, I want you to know I think of you every day. I never stopped. I just didn't know how to come back from what I did. The last paragraph was the one Naomi would return to again and again. If you ever want to talk, I will be here. And if you never write again, I will understand. But I hope someday you'll allow me the chance to sit across from you, not to explain, not to beg, but just to see the woman you've become. It was signed simply Claire. No love, no mom, just her name. Naomi sat frozen for a long time. She didn't cry. Not yet. But something softened. Not forgiveness, not even trust, but space. A door opening an inch in a house that had been locked shut her entire life. She folded the letter with trembling hands, slid it back into the envelope and held it against her chest. For the first time, she allowed herself a terrifying, tentative thought. Maybe this story wasn't over. Maybe it was just beginning. Claire hadn't expected a reply. She told herself that again and again. The letter was never meant to open a door. It was meant to acknowledge the one she had closed. Still, once it left her hands, she checked the mailbox every day like a nervous teenager waiting for a college acceptance. She flinched every time the phone rang from an unknown number. She found herself watching women Naomi's age in grocery stores and wondering irrationally if one of them could be her daughter walking by without knowing. But days passed, then a week, then 10. Each morning, Claire moved through her routine packing. Luke's lunch, brushing Rachel's hair, organizing closings at the office. But inside, the quiet unease grew. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was something raw. The painful recognition that she had no control over what came next. For 17 years, silence had been her defense. Now it was her punishment. One night, after the kids were asleep and the dishwasher had hummed its last cycle, Claire stood in the kitchen holding a glass of wine she hadn't touched. Greg walked in, loosening his tie, his face drawn from a long day. He asked if everything was okay, and for the first time in years, Claire didn't lie. "I got a letter," she said quietly, "from someone I never thought I'd hear from." Greg looked up. Claire stared at the wine in her hand for a moment, then said it, "Naomi." The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. Greg didn't sit down. He didn't speak. Just stood there, stunned. "I wrote her back," Claire continued. "I didn't tell her much, just the truth I should have told a long time ago." Greg's shoulders tensed. "Why now?" "Because she exists." Claire replied, her voice breaking. "Because she found me. Because I've built an entire life on pretending that one moment didn't matter, and I'm tired of living like a ghost in my own story." Greg exhaled slowly and finally sat down at the edge of the dining table. "Do the kids know?" Claire shook her head. "Not yet, but they will. One day." Greg rubbed his face with both hands, his wedding ring catching the light. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Claire whispered. "You didn't make the choice. I did. There was no yelling, no judgment, just silence, the kind that follows after years of ignoring the truth finally cracks open. Claire felt her eyes sting, but she didn't cry. She didn't need to. For once, she had said what needed to be said, and the world hadn't fallen apart. Later that night, after Greg had gone to bed, Claire stood at the foot of the stairs and looked around the house. It was beautiful, warm, full of pictures, books, reminders of a family that loved and lived well. But there was always someone missing in those frames, not just from the photographs, but from the story. Now Naomi had spoken, and Claire had answered. Whatever happened next, acceptance, rejection, silence. Claire knew she could no longer pretend, because the past doesn't stay buried forever. Eventually it knocks, and this time she had opened the door. Naomi read the letter again 3 days later, this time under the warm light of her bedroom lamp, long after the world had gone quiet. She'd been carrying it around like a fragile artifact tucked into her notebook, as though proximity alone might help her decide what to do with it. The words hadn't changed, but they felt different now, less foreign, more human. She wasn't sure when that shift had happened. Maybe it was the way Claire's handwriting looped too neatly, trying too hard to stay composed. Or maybe it was the last line. Not to explain, not to beg, just to see the woman you've become. That part had stuck like a splinter. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that Claire Whitman wasn't lying, that she wasn't manipulating, sugarcoating, rewriting the past to save face. But trust was a muscle Naomi had trained to stay dormant. Her first instinct was always to protect herself. And yet there was a soft, flickering ache beneath her ribs, one that looked dangerously like longing. She stared at the letter, then at the photo still pinned to her vision board. It was from her last campaign, the Vogue feature that had gone viral, the one where her smile was polished, defiant, untouchable. People called her radiant, fearless, effortless. They didn't know how heavy it was to smile like that with a hollow in your chest. That weekend, Naomi went to Denise's apartment and laid the letter on the table like evidence. Denise didn't say anything for a while. She just read it twice and set it down, eyes shining with something Naomi couldn't quite name. Relief, fear, pride, maybe all three. She didn't ask for anything, Naomi said, watching her fingers trace the edge of the paper. She didn't even call herself my mom. Denise nodded. That's a start, isn't it? Naomi exhaled slowly. Or a trap. Or maybe Denise said gently, it's a woman trying to figure out how to approach the daughter she lost the right to claim. Naomi didn't answer, because that was the part she couldn't quite forgive. Not the giving up she had made peace with, that in theory, but the silence that followed. 17 years without a whisper. Not a birthday card. Not even a damn question. How does a mother erase a child and just continue? And yet. Claire had written, not perfectly, not poetically, but honestly. That night, Naomi sat down at her kitchen table with a cup of peppermint tea and her laptop open to a blank email window. She stared at the blinking cursor for a long time. The weight of what she was about to do sank heavy into her spine. She could still walk away. She didn't owe anyone anything. Not grace, not warmth, not access. But she typed anyway. Claire, I got your letter. I'm not sure what I'm ready for yet, but I'm not ready to disappear again either. Let's start slow. She hovered over the send button, then clicked. No fireworks, no tears, just a quiet breath and the strange, trembling sensation of a door creaking open. Whatever came next, she knew this much. She was no longer just the abandoned. She was a woman reclaiming the right to choose what came next, and that choice for now was this begin. Claire wasn't expecting anything when she opened her inbox that morning. Most days it was the same routine, a flood of work emails, a few subscription alerts she kept forgetting to unsubscribe from, and updates from the kids' school portal. But that morning, sandwiched between a client inquiry and a reminder for a dental appointment, there it was. Subject line, no subject. Sender, Naomi Ellis. Claire's heart stuttered. She blinked to make sure it wasn't a trick of the eye. She hovered the mouse over the email, unable to click for several seconds. Her palms went cold. Her stomach tightened. When she finally opened it, the message was short, barely 4 lines. Claire, I got your letter. I'm not sure what I'm ready for yet, but I'm not ready to disappear again either. Let's start slow. That was it. No greeting, no signature, no warm punctuation or softened phrasing. But it was more than Claire had ever expected. She read it once, then again, then 10 more times, as if some hidden meaning might reveal itself with repetition. Let's start slow. Those 3 words unraveled her. She wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come. What she felt wasn't release, it was a strange mix of relief and terror. It was hope, but the kind of hope that carried risk. The kind that reminded her how much damage could still be done. Claire sat back in her chair, staring at the screen as the morning sun filtered through the blinds. Naomi had responded. That meant the letter mattered. That meant despite all the silence, there was still something left. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but an opening. She didn't reply right away. She knew better. This wasn't a moment to be rushed or filled with performative apologies. Naomi didn't need grand gestures. She needed consistency, presence, Proof that Claire wasn't just showing up because she was invited back in, but because she was willing to do the quiet, painful work of staying. Later that afternoon, while Rachel did homework in the next room and the dryer hummed with another cycle of ordinary life, Claire opened a blank draft. She stared at the screen for a long time before typing. Naomi, thank you. Just thank you. I will respect your pace. I'll follow your lead. And I'll be here when you're ready. No pressure, no expectation, just here. She didn't reread it a dozen times. She didn't agonize over tone. She just hit send. Then she walked into the living room, sat on the edge of the couch, and looked at the family photos on the mantel. Greg, the twins, even the dog, each smile, frozen in time, each frame a piece of the story she'd carefully constructed. But now she saw the gap between them differently, not as a hole to be hidden, but as a space finally being acknowledged. Claire knew she couldn't rewrite the past, but she could show up for the present. And maybe if she was lucky, she could earn a place in the future. For now, that had to be enough. And for the first time, it actually was. Naomi didn't tell anyone she was going to meet Claire. Not Denise, not her best friend Amara, not even her therapist. It wasn't because she was hiding it, at least that's what she told herself, but because putting it into words would make it feel real, and she still wasn't sure she was ready for that. Saying it out loud meant acknowledging that she still cared, that somewhere beneath the years of silence, the closed files and the practiced detachment, she still wanted something from the woman who walked away. They had exchanged a few more emails since that first one. Nothing dramatic, no emotional purging. Claire kept it simple, steady. She asked how Naomi was doing. She told her about the magnolia tree in her backyard blooming early this spring, about Luke winning his 5th grade spelling bee, and about a book she had read that reminded her of nothing and everything all at once. Naomi in turn shared very little, just breadcrumbs. A mention of an upcoming shoot in New York. A sarcastic comment about almond milk lattes. One photo her cat Bean curled up on her windowsill. But that had been enough. Something about the space between their words had softened. And finally, Naomi typed the question that had been waiting at the edge of every conversation. Would you be open to meeting in person? Claire responded less than an hour later. Yes. Whenever you're ready. Anywhere. Now, here she was sitting in the corner of a small cafe in Silver Lake, wearing a denim jacket she had almost thrown out last year and sipping a coffee that had long gone cold. Her foot tapped against the leg of the table, an unconscious rhythm of nerves. Every time the door opened, her spine straightened. She had rehearsed what she would say. Not in a mirror, but in her mind, over and over. You don't get to cry first. You don't get to act like the victim. You don't get to rewrite this. But now that the moment was near, those words felt like armor that didn't fit anymore. At 3:02 p.m., Claire walked in. She looked older, of course, softer in the eyes, thinner in the shoulders. She wore a beige cardigan over a white blouse, the kind of outfit that whispered careful neutrality. Her hair was pulled back like she wasn't sure if this was an apology or a job interview. She scanned the room, spotted Naomi, and paused. For one long second, they just looked at each other, two strangers sharing a history too heavy for the air between them. Then Claire walked over. Hi, she said, her voice quieter than Naomi expected. Thank you for meeting me. Naomi nodded, not trusting her voice yet. Claire sat down across from her, clasping her hands together, like she needed to physically hold herself in place. There were 1,000 things Naomi could have said. 1,000 questions. Accusations, demands, but instead she simply asked, "Why now?" Claire's breath caught, then steadied. "Because pretending you didn't exist didn't make the pain go away," she said. "It just made me hollow. And I don't want to be hollow anymore." Naomi didn't answer right away. She just looked out the window, then back at the woman who had once left her behind and now sat trying imperfectly to return. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a beginning. And for now, that was enough. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, it was thick with everything unsaid. Naomi stirred her coffee not because it needed stirring, but because her hands didn't know where else to go. Claire sat still as if movement might break the fragile balance between them. Naomi glanced at her. "You know what I remember?" she asked, her voice even. "Being 6 and thinking my birth mother was probably dead. Because the idea that she was alive but didn't want me, that was worse." Claire looked down, her fingers tightening around her mug. "I deserve that." Naomi shook her head. "It's not about what you deserve. It's about what happened. You left. And no one explained why." Claire's throat worked like she was swallowing glass. "I know. I've gone over that day in my head so many times. The hospital, the signature, the drive home. It all felt like someone else was living it for me. I kept telling myself it was the right thing, that you'd be better off without me." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "And were you right?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question, sharp and clean like a scalpel. Claire didn't answer immediately. She looked straight at her daughter, her voice trembling but honest. "I don't know. I don't know what kind of life you had. I don't know what you lost or what you gained. But I know what I lost. I know I missed your first steps, your first words, your first heartbreak. And I told myself I didn't have the right to miss those things, but I did. Every day." Naomi felt something inside her loosen just slightly. She hadn't come here expecting truth. She had prepared for defensiveness, for rationalizations cloaked in maternal regret. But Claire wasn't offering explanations. She was offering presence, vulnerability, and that was harder to navigate. "You could have looked for me," Naomi said. "I mean, at any point. You could have tried." "I did," Claire whispered. "Not well, not fast enough. But I did. I kept tabs from a distance, adoption records, articles, social media. I saw your face on that magazine cover and I knew right away. You looked like me, but stronger. Like the best parts of me survived without me." The words stung and soothed in equal measure. Naomi looked down at her hands that had learned to build walls before bridges, to protect before trust. But something about this conversation, this moment, was different. Not healed, not whole, but less jagged. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with you now," Naomi admitted. "I don't know how to let you in," Claire nodded slowly. "Then don't. Not yet. Or ever, if that's what you need. I didn't come here to ask for a role in your life. I came because I couldn't live another year pretending you weren't my daughter." The words hung in the air. Finally, Naomi met her gaze. "Then don't pretend. Just be honest, even when it's messy." Claire's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. "I can do that." Naomi picked up her coffee and took a long sip. The taste was bitter, but it was real. Everything today had been real. And for a woman who'd spent her life wondering if she'd been nothing more than a secret that was enough to stay seated a little longer, Naomi didn't cry during the meeting. Not once. Not when Claire said she missed her first words. Not when she admitted she kept tabs from a distance. Not even when she called Naomi my daughter with that cracked, trembling voice like she wasn't sure she had the right. But that night, after she got home, something broke. It happened quietly, no dramatic sobs, no fists against walls. Just her standing in the shower, forehead against cool tile, letting the water blur the world, while her mind flooded with everything she didn't know how to name. It wasn't anger, not exactly. Not grief either. It was more like mourning for something that had never fully existed. She wasn't crying for the mother she lost. She was crying for the version of herself that had grown up pretending she didn't care. She'd spent years crafting an identity built on steel and detachment. She had goals. She had awards. She had her own apartment, her own career, her own damn name on a billboard. And yet in the middle of it all, there had always been that invisible thread, pulling somewhere deep in her chest, tugging every time someone asked if she wanted kids someday, or when a model mentioned her mother flying in for a shoot. It was a dull ache she had learned to silence with ambition, but now that silence was cracking. After the shower, Naomi curled up on the couch in her robe, a blanket pulled over her knees, and scrolled through old photos on her phone. She paused on one from years ago, a shot Denise had taken during their first fashion week together. Naomi was laughing, her head thrown back, wearing borrowed heels and a chipped manicure. She looked free, confident, but now with everything that had surfaced, even that memory felt layered. What kind of confidence is built on a foundation of unanswered questions? She opened her email, reread Claire's last message, and stared at the blinking cursor. She didn't know what to say, didn't want to rush what little trust had been built, but she also couldn't pretend nothing had shifted, because something had. Instead of typing, she stood and walked to her bookshelf. At the very back, behind a stack of design magazines, was a box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were adoption documents, scribbled notes from social workers, an envelope she'd once been too afraid to open. She took a breath and pulled it out. Inside was a photocopy of her original birth certificate. And there it was in black and white, Claire Whitman. The name she had stared at for years like a distant star. Now it didn't feel so far away. Naomi didn't call, not yet. But the next morning she sent a message. Not an essay, just 3 words. Let's keep talking. No emojis, no punctuation. Just a line stretched between 2 women with matching blood and mismatched histories. Then she got dressed, made her coffee, and opened her planner. There was a shoot next week, a dinner with Denise. Life didn't pause for emotional breakthroughs. But beneath it all, something had shifted. For the first time in her life, Naomi was starting to believe that maybe she wasn't abandoned. Maybe she was just waiting to be found. Claire had never known how silence could feel so loud until Naomi left the cafe. She sat there for another 20 minutes, fingers wrapped around a lukewarm mug, staring at the empty seat across from her, like the imprint Naomi left might suddenly speak up and offer her a manual on what to do next. She didn't expect forgiveness. She didn't even expect another meeting. But she hadn't expected that. Naomi had been composed, too composed. The kind of poise Claire had once envied in powerful women, until she realized that sometimes stillness was a form of armor. Every word Naomi spoke had been measured, not cold, but deliberate. And beneath it all, Claire could feel the restraint. Not anger, not even hatred, just years of emotional self-discipline. The kind of discipline a child builds when no one ever comes back for them. Driving home. Claire kept the radio off. She didn't want music. She didn't want distraction. She wanted to sit inside what had just happened. Not escape it. Not smooth it over. Just feel it for what it was, a miracle wrapped in tension. And maybe that's what this phase would be. Not a redemption arc. Not some cinematic reconciliation. But 2 women learning how to share a past without letting it destroy the future. When she pulled into the driveway, Rachel was waiting on the porch, knees pulled up under her chin, the way she used to sit when she was 5 and scared to go to school. Claire's chest tightened. "How'd it go?" Rachel asked as Claire approached. Claire sat beside her, taking a moment before answering. "It went, honestly." Rachel looked at her sideways. "Is that code for terrible?" Claire smiled faintly. "No, it means it hurt. But it mattered." They sat in silence, the air between them softening with the early evening breeze. For a moment, Claire let herself just exist there as the woman who had lost 1 daughter and still had another beside her. The contrast was almost unbearable. That night, after Rachel went to bed and Greg called to check in from his conference, Claire opened her journal. It had been years since she'd written anything personal. Most of her recent pages were to-do lists and grocery plans. But tonight her hand moved without hesitation. She looked like me. Not in the obvious ways, but in the places only a mother notices. The tilt of her jaw. The guarded edge behind her eyes. I saw her pain, but I also saw her strength. And I can't stop thinking how that strength grew in spite of me. Or maybe because of me. I don't know which is worse. She closed the journal and set it on the nightstand next to a framed photo of Rachel's kindergarten graduation. For so long she had tried to silence the part of herself that whispered Naomi's name. That version of her, the one who gave up her child and never spoke of it, had been polished, presentable, efficient. But not whole. Never whole. Now something different was taking root. The next morning, Claire did something small but deliberate. She removed the last framed certificate from her office wall, an award for campaign excellence from nearly a decade ago, and in its place, She hung a printout of Naomi's latest magazine cover. No caption, no fanfare, just the image of her daughter standing tall in a field of gold, light chin lifted like the world had nothing left to prove. Claire looked at it and whispered, "You're not mine because of biology. You're mine because I'm choosing you now, every day forward." And that finally was a truth she could live with. The morning light came in soft through the sheer curtains of Naomi's apartment, casting pale gold shadows across the hardwood floor. She stood barefoot in the center of the living room, holding a cup of tea she'd made, but barely touched. The house was still save for the low hum of traffic beyond her windows and the distant bark of a dog somewhere 3 floors below. But inside her chest, something else moved. A weight she hadn't known she was carrying had shifted. Last night hadn't changed everything. There were still unanswered questions, lingering pain memories she couldn't rewrite. But there had been laughter at the dinner table. There had been connection. And for the first time in a long time, there hadn't been pretending. She walked over to the table where her old keepsake box sat, usually closed, usually ignored. But today she opened it. She sifted through old modeling comp cards, Polaroids from her first year in New York, postcards from Denise during their early shoots. Near the bottom was the envelope from the agency that had processed her adoption file, long since emptied of mystery, but never quite processed in spirit. Beneath that was something new, a folded slip of paper with Claire's handwriting, a note she'd left taped to the bottom of the wine bottle. "I'll never ask to erase your story. I just hope one day there's room in it for me to stand beside it." Naomi stared at the words for a long time. They didn't solve anything. They didn't fix the years. But they did what truth always does. They honored the wound, instead of hiding it. She thought of Rachel's nervous smile, Greg's awkward but earnest questions, Claire's barely concealed tears every time Naomi spoke. They weren't perfect. None of them were. But perfection had never been the goal. Presence was. Naomi turned toward the mirror in the hallway. She studied her own reflection, not critically, not through the lens of an editor or designer, but just as a woman trying to see herself clearly. The high cheekbones, the depth in her eyes, the familiar defiance in her posture. These features had once made her feel unplaceable, unwanted. Now they told a different story, one of survival, one of quiet power. She walked to her desk, opened her laptop, and created a new folder. She titled it Claire. Inside, she dragged one photo, the only one she'd ever taken of her birth mother. A quick snap during dinner, Claire laughing as Rachel gestured dramatically with a breadstick. It was blurry, a little off-center, unposed. But it was real. Naomi closed the laptop and finally took a sip of her tea. Still warm. Still bitter. Still hers. Later that day, she would walk past a billboard of herself, one of the older campaigns lit up on the corner of West 57th. And for the first time, she wouldn't wonder if the woman in the photo was enough. She wouldn't question if she was whole. Because now she knew the truth. She had been hidden, not lost. And now she was finally home. In real life, many of us carry the weight of choices we made or choices made for us that echo into the present. Like Claire and Naomi, we often find ourselves navigating silence, guilt, unanswered questions, or identities shaped by absence. The truth is, no matter how much time has passed, healing is still possible. But it doesn't come through denial. It comes through honesty, through showing up, and through allowing others to tell their story, even when it includes our failures. One of the most powerful lessons this story teaches is that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing presence today. You don't need the perfect apology. You don't need a grand gesture. Sometimes you just need to be willing to sit at the table, listen with humility, and begin again. Not every story ends with a warm embrace or perfect resolution. Sometimes it ends quietly with a dinner table full of hesitant glances, with an old photo framed on the wall, or with a single message that says, "Let's keep talking." What matters isn't how perfect the ending is, but whether the people inside the story dared to face what hurt, what was lost, and what still remains. Naomi and Claire didn't rewrite the past. They couldn't. but they chose to stand in its shadow and build something new, a fragile but honest beginning rooted in truth, not illusion. That's what healing often looks like in real life, not a moment of triumph, but a slow return to the places you once avoided. It's showing up after years of silence. It's saying, "I don't know," instead of pretending you've moved on. And sometimes it's choosing to forgive not because someone deserves it, but because you deserve peace. We hope this story gave you more than just a narrative. We hope it gave you reflection, maybe even courage. And if you've ever lived in the quiet ache of being left behind or the heavy guilt of walking away, this is your reminder that healing is not only possible, it's waiting for your permission. If this moved you in any way, let us know in the comments. Share your story, or simply say, "I'm ready." And before you go, don't forget to like, save, and subscribe, because sometimes the right story finds us at exactly the right time. And for anyone who's ever felt abandoned, rejected, or silenced, this story is a reminder that your story isn't over just because someone walked away. You get to decide how the next chapter is written. You are not broken. You are not forgotten. You are becoming. If this message spoke to you, leave a comment below, whether it's something you've healed from something you're still carrying, or simply a thought you want to share. Don't forget to save this video for later reflection, and subscribe to this channel for more powerful emotional stories that help us all understand ourselves and each other just a little better.